The gunshot echoed across the Montana prairie, startling a flock of sparrows into flight as Tabitha Zimmerman pressed the still-smoking Colt revolver into the fresh soil of her husband's grave. The year was 1882, and she had just buried the second man she had ever loved. The first had been taken by war, the second by typhoid. And at 27 years old, she was alone again, with nothing but a struggling cattle ranch and a heart she swore would never heal. "She'll never love again," they whispered in the small town of White Rock whenever she rode in for supplies. "Poor widow Zimmerman," they said, failing to lower their voices as she passed by, her spine straight as a ramrod, her green eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge their pity. The ranch hands were loyal to her, but most had families of their own in town. As winter approached, the vast emptiness of the ranch house threatened to swallow her whole. The night stretched endlessly, punctuated only by the howling of distant wolves and the creaking of the house as it settled against the bitter cold. Tabitha stared at the reflection in her bedroom mirror. The woman who gazed back had once been vibrant, quick to laugh, with copper-colored hair that caught the sunlight. Now her eyes held shadows, her lips rarely curved in anything resembling joy. She was still beautiful, a fact that seemed to matter less and less with each passing day. "I do not need a man," she told her reflection firmly. "I need cattle, good weather, and enough strength to keep this ranch alive." She nodded at herself, a silent pact between the woman she had been and the woman she had become. The following morning, Tabitha rode into town earlier than usual. The general store would be receiving its monthly shipment, and she needed supplies before the first heavy snowfall. As she approached, she noticed an unfamiliar horse hitched outside a magnificent palomino with a distinctive black diamond marking on its flank. Inside the store, Mr. Peterson greeted her with his usual kindness. "Mrs. Zimmerman, good to see you. Your order from last month just arrived." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I'll need to add some things for winter." She handed him a carefully written list, her neat script detailing the necessities of ranch life. A deep voice behind her made her turn. "Excuse me, madam. Might I reach past you for that coffee?" The man was tall, his broad shoulders filling out a worn leather coat. Dark blonde hair fell just above a pair of the bluest eyes Tabitha had ever seen. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his collar. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside, surprised at how her voice sounded almost like her old self. He smiled just slightly and reached for the tin of coffee. "Much obliged. Name's Cooper Xavier. Just acquired the old Jameson place north of here. Tabitha Zimmerman. My ranch borders Jameson's property to the east. Then we're neighbors." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Zimmerman." There was something about him that made her uncomfortable, not in a threatening way, but in the way that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of noticing a man's presence. She didn't like it. "The Jameson place has been abandoned for years," she said, her tone cooler than before. "It'll take more than good intentions to make it profitable again." If her curtness offended him, he didn't show it. "You're right about that. Luckily, I've got more than intentions. I've got experience and a fair bit of stubbornness." He tipped his hat to her. "Hope to see you around, neighbor." As he walked away, Tabitha felt the eyes of everyone in the store on her. She knew what they were thinking. Poor widow Zimmerman, so cold to a handsome newcomer. She didn't care. Let them think what they would. She had a ranch to run, and a heart locked tight against ever feeling such pain again. The following weeks brought an early winter, with snow piling deep against the fences and drifts reaching the windows of the ranch house. Tabitha spent her days checking on the cattle, ensuring they had access to feed and weren't trapped by the snow. Her evenings were quiet, spent by the fire, with a book or mending clothes. The solitude had become familiar, if not entirely comfortable. One particularly harsh afternoon, as a blizzard howled outside, a pounding at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, rifle in hand. Few people traveled in such weather. "Who's there?" she called through the door. "Cooper Xavier, madam. Sorry to trouble you, but my horse pulled up lame, and the storm's getting worse. Could I impose on your hospitality until it passes?" Tabitha hesitated. The storm was indeed fierce, and sending anyone back out into it would be cruel. Still, the thought of his company in particular, made her uneasy. Mrs. Zimmerman, his voice carried a note of genuine concern. I understand if you're uncomfortable. I can try to make it to the bunkhouse instead. The bunkhouse is empty, she replied, finally opening the door. The hands are all in town for the winter. You'd freeze before morning. Cooper stood on her porch, snow coating his hat and shoulders. His palomino stood miserably behind him, clearly favoring its right front leg. Bring your horse to the barn, she said. There's an empty stall. I'll put on some coffee. Thank you kindly. He offered a grateful smile that she pointedly did not return. After settling his horse in the barn, Cooper entered the house, carefully removing his boots and coat at the door. Tabitha had placed a cup of coffee on the table and retreated to the other side of the room, maintaining her distance. This is mighty kind of you, he said, warming his hands on the mug. I apologize for the intrusion. Anyone would do the same, she replied simply. The guest room is upstairs, first door on the right. There are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. You run this place alone? He asked, his eyes taking in the well-maintained house. I have ranch hands who help with the cattle, but they have their own families in town. They ride out daily when weather permits. Her tone made it clear she wasn't interested in elaborating. Cooper nodded, seeming to understand her reticence. I won't trouble you further tonight. Thank you again for your kindness. True to his word, he retired early, leaving Tabitha alone with her thoughts. There was something unsettling about having a man under her roof again. It wasn't fear Cooper Xavier struck her as many things, but dangerous wasn't one of them. It was the reminder of what she had lost, what she had once had. A shared cup of coffee at the end of the day. A voice other than her own in the rooms, the simple presence of another person who cared if she was cold or tired or sad. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Tabitha and Cooper settled into an uneasy coexistence. He insisted on helping with chores, chopping firewood, and checking on the nearest cattle. His experience was evident in the way he handled the animals, and the respect with which he treated her property. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they sat at opposite ends of the hearth, the silence between them had softened somewhat. Your husband, Cooper began carefully, he must have been a good rancher. This place is well designed. Tabitha stiffened slightly. He was. Jonathan knew cattle better than most men know their own children. How long were you married? 4 years. She didn't want to talk about it, but somehow the words kept coming. Before him, I was engaged to a Union soldier. He died at Gettysburg. Cooper's eyes showed genuine sympathy, not pity. That's a lot of loss for anyone to bear. Life happens as it will, she replied. I've made my peace with it. Have you? The question was gentle, not challenging. Tabitha looked at him directly for perhaps the first time. What choice do I have? Before he could answer, the wind outside suddenly died, the absence of its howl creating a strange new silence. Storm's breaking, Cooper observed, moving to the window. Should be clear by morning. Yes, Tabitha agreed, uncertain whether to feel relief or something else entirely. You should be able to return to your ranch tomorrow. The next morning dawned clear and brilliantly white. Cooper checked his horse, which seemed to have recovered from its lameness, and prepared to leave. Tabitha stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl. I'm grateful for your hospitality, Mrs. Zimmerman, Cooper said, adjusting his saddle. I hope I can repay the kindness someday. It was nothing, she replied. Safe travels. He mounted his palomino and tipped his hat to her. I'll be seeing you, neighbor. As he rode away across the snow-covered land, Tabitha felt a curious emptiness settle over the ranch. She told herself it was simply the aftermath of the storm, the strange quiet that always followed nature's fury. It had nothing to do with Cooper Xavier's departure. 2 weeks passed before Tabitha saw Cooper again. She was in town, arranging for additional feed to be delivered to the ranch when he entered the general store. He smiled when he saw her. That same genuine expression that reached his eyes. Mrs. Zimmerman, good to see you well. Mr. Xavier, she nodded politely. How is your ranch coming along? Slowly but surely. I've hired a few hands to help with repairs before spring calving. He hesitated, then added, I was hoping to speak with you about the shared water rights on our properties. The creek that runs between our lands, I want to ensure I'm respecting any established agreements. That's considerate of you. Tabitha was surprised by his thoughtfulness. Perhaps you could stop by the ranch tomorrow? I have the papers my husband drafted with Mr. Jameson years ago. I'd appreciate that. Would mid-morning suit you? That would be fine. As promised, Cooper arrived the next day. Tabitha had the water rights documents laid out on the dining table, along with a pot of coffee. They spent an hour reviewing the agreements, Cooper asking intelligent questions and making notes of his own. Your husband was fair in these terms, he remarked, studying the map of the creek's path. He ensured both properties had equal access during dry seasons. Jonathan believed good neighbors were more valuable than a few extra gallons of water, Tabitha replied, surprised at how easily she could speak of her husband now. Cooper smiled. A wise man. I intend to honor these agreements fully. He rolled up the map carefully. Thank you for taking the time to explain everything. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Mrs. Zimmerman, I know you keep to yourself, and I respect that. But if you ever need help with anything on your ranch, I'd be glad to lend a hand. Tabitha felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, not quite discomfort, but not entirely welcome either. That's kind, but unnecessary. I manage well enough. I have no doubt of that, he replied. The offer stands all the same. After he left, Tabitha found herself thinking about Cooper Xavier more than she cared to admit. There was a straightforwardness about him that was refreshing, no pity in his eyes when he looked at her, just respect and perhaps a hint of admiration. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her that way. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, Tabitha faced new challenges. The spring thaw brought flooding to parts of her grazing land, and one of her best breeding bulls fell ill. She worked from dawn until dusk, often skipping meals and falling into bed exhausted. One evening, as she struggled to repair a broken fence line alone, a familiar palomino appeared on the ridge. Looks like you could use an extra pair of hands, Cooper called, dismounting and approaching with a coil of wire over his shoulder. I didn't ask for help, Tabitha replied, though without her usual edge. No, you didn't. He set to work alongside her without further comment, his experienced hands making quick work of the repairs. When they finished, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Cooper leaned against a fence post, wiping his brow. Beautiful land you have here. Tabitha nodded, looking out over the rolling hills of her ranch. It is. Jonathan had an eye for good grazing country. And you have an eye for maintaining it. Cooper's gaze was direct, his admiration clear. Not everyone could keep a place this size running, especially alone. I'm not alone, she countered. I have hands, but the decisions, the worry that's all yours to bear. She didn't reply, uncomfortable with how accurately he had assessed her situation. I should be going, Cooper said, sensing her discomfort. But my offer still stands. Neighboring ranches should look out for each other. After he left, Tabitha found herself standing at the fence line long after darkness had fallen, staring in the direction of the Jameson now Xavier Ranch. For the first time in over a year, she felt something stir within her chest that wasn't grief or determination. It was small, barely perceptible, but undeniably present, a flicker of interest in something beyond mere survival. The feeling troubled her. She had built walls around her heart for good reason. Loving meant losing, and she had lost enough for one lifetime. Yet Cooper Xavier had a way of making those walls seem less necessary, less protective, and more isolating. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves wobbling on spindly legs, wildflowers dotting the pastures, and birdsong filling the mornings. With the change in seasons came increased activity. Cattle needed to be moved to fresh grazing areas. Fences required constant attention. And predators grew bolder as they sought food for their own young. Tabitha was checking the western fence line when she heard gunshots in the distance. Concerned, she rode toward the sound, her hand resting on the rifle secured to her saddle. As she crested a hill, she saw Cooper and two of his hands facing off against three men on horseback. One of Cooper's men was on the ground, clutching his arm. Without hesitation, Tabitha spurred her horse forward, rifle now in hand. As she approached, she recognized the men confronting Cooper, the Wallace brothers, notorious for their cattle rustling and general lawlessness. "This is private property Wallace's," she called out, her rifle raised but not yet aimed. "You're not welcome here." The oldest Wallace, Earl, sneered at her. "Well, if it isn't the widow Zimmerman." "This ain't your land anymore, lady. It belongs to City Boy here, and he's about to learn some local customs. Cooper's face was grim. They've been helping themselves to cattle along the shared boundary, claimed it was their right as established residents. Nothing established about thieves, Tabitha replied coldly. Sheriff Turner might be interested to hear your rustling again, Earl, especially after he warned you about crossing into this county. Earl's expression darkened. You threatening me, woman? Not at all, just stating facts. Her rifle remained steady. Now, you and your brothers can ride away, or we can have a more serious conversation about property rights. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Earl spat on the ground. This ain't over, Xavier. You best watch your back. With a jerk of his head, he signaled his brothers, and they rode off, casting threatening glances over their shoulders. Once they were out of sight, Tabitha lowered her rifle and approached Cooper's injured hand. How bad is it, Sam? The young cowboy grimaced. Just a graze, Mrs. Zimmerman, nothing serious. Cooper looked at Tabitha with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. Thank you for riding in like that. The Wallaces might have escalated things further if you hadn't shown up. They're bullies, always have been. She dismounted to help Sam. But they're dangerous bullies. They won't take kindly to being confronted. I gathered as much. Cooper's expression was serious. They've been taking cattle for weeks, according to my hands. I thought a direct confrontation might put an end to it. The Wallaces only understand one thing, force, and they have numbers on their side. She tore a strip from her petticoat to bind Sam's wound. You should send word to Sheriff Turner. Cooper nodded. I'll ride into town tomorrow. He hesitated, then added, Mrs. Zimmerman, Tabitha. I'm concerned they might target your ranch as well, given your intervention today. The use of her first name startled her, but she didn't correct him. I've dealt with the Wallaces before. They know better than to cross my boundary lines. Still, I'd feel better if you'd accept some additional protection, at least until this blows over. Perhaps one or two of my hands could patrol the shared border. Tabitha wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, as she always had, but the practical rancher in her recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. That would be appreciated. I can send one of my men to work with yours on establishing patrol routes. The relief on Cooper's face was evident. Thank you. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because you helped me. His concern touched something inside her that had been dormant for too long. She nodded briskly, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her chest. It's simply good business, protecting both our interests. Of course, he agreed, though his eyes suggested he understood more than she was saying. That night, Tabitha found sleep elusive. The confrontation with the Wallaces wasn't what kept her awake. It was the memory of Cooper's face when he'd called her by her first name, the genuine concern in his eyes, and her own unexpected response to it. She had felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced since Jonathan died, not as a widow to be pitied, but as a woman of strength and value. The thought terrified her. Over the following weeks, Cooper's men and Tabitha's established joint patrols along their shared boundary. The Wallace brothers made no further appearances, though cattle continued to disappear occasionally from the outer reaches of both ranches. Cooper rode over regularly to confer with Tabitha about the situation. Their meetings, initially brief and businesslike, gradually lengthened. She found herself offering coffee, then meals. Conversations extended beyond ranch matters to books they had read, places they had seen, experiences that had shaped them. Cooper spoke of his childhood in Boston, his decision to head west after the war, and his years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas before saving enough to buy his own ranch. Why Montana? She asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. The land, he replied simply. First time I rode through these valleys, I knew this was where I belonged. Took me 10 years to make it happen, but some dreams are worth the wait. Tabitha understood that feeling all too well. Jonathan felt the same way, said the mountains here spoke to him in a way the flat Texas plains never did. He was right. Cooper glanced at her. You speak of him more easily now. She considered this. I suppose I do. Time changes things. Does it change everything? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Some things, she answered carefully, not all. Spring turned to summer, and the land flourished under abundant rain and sunshine. Tabitha's herd grew with healthy new calves, and the first cutting of hay promised to be bountiful. Cooper's ranch, too, was beginning to thrive under his careful management. In town, people noticed the changing dynamic between Widow Zimmerman and the newcomer Cooper Xavier. Whispers followed Tabitha as she shopped for supplies. "They say she smiles now," one woman murmured to another. "First time since Jonathan passed." "Never thought she'd open her heart again," came the reply. "Poor thing was so broken after losing two men she loved." "She'll never love again," a third voice chimed in. "Not really. Some wounds go too deep. She's just being neighborly, nothing more." Tabitha pretended not to hear, but the words burrowed into her consciousness. Were they right? Had she become incapable of truly loving again? The thought troubled her more than it should have. That evening, Cooper invited her to dinner at his ranch, the first such invitation he had extended. She accepted with a casualness that belied her inner turmoil. She spent more time than necessary choosing a dress, finally settling on a deep blue one that Jonathan had always said matched her eyes. Cooper's ranch house was smaller than hers, but well appointed. He had clearly invested time and care in making it comfortable. The table was set with good china and fresh wildflowers, and the aroma of roasting beef filled the air. "I hope you don't mind," he said, taking her wrap. "I asked Mrs. Hollister from town to prepare the meal. My cooking skills are limited to campfire fare." "It smells wonderful," she replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. Dinner was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily between them. Cooper spoke of his plans for the ranch, his hopes for building a herd that could rival the largest in the territory. Tabitha found herself sharing her own ambitions, expanding her grazing land, possibly adding sheep to diversify. After the meal, they sat on his porch, watching fireflies dance across the darkening pasture. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. "Thank you for coming tonight," Cooper said, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "I've wanted to invite you for some time. Why didn't you?" The question escaped before she could consider it. He turned to look at her, his expression open and honest. "I was afraid you'd say no, and I was afraid of why I wanted you to say yes." Tabitha's heart quickened. "And why did you want me to say yes?" Cooper reached out slowly, giving her ample time to pull away, and covered her hand with his. "Because being with you makes me feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her body. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat behind the safety of her carefully constructed walls, but another part, a part that had been silent for too long, wanted to turn her hand over and lace her fingers through his. Before she could decide, hoofbeats sounded in the distance, approaching rapidly. Cooper was immediately alert, rising to his feet as one of his hands galloped into the yard. "Mr. Xavier, fire at the south pasture fence line. Looks deliberate." Cooper turned to Tabitha, conflict evident in his face. "I have to. Go," she said, already on her feet. "I'll come with you." They rode hard toward the southern boundary, where flames were visible against the night sky. As they approached, Tabitha could see that a significant stretch of fence was ablaze, with fire spreading to the dry grass beyond. Cooper's men were already fighting the fire, using blankets and shovels to smother the flames and create fire breaks. Tabitha dismounted and joined them without hesitation, grabbing a shovel from a wagon and digging alongside the cowboys to cut off the fire's path. For hours they battled the blaze, faces blackened with soot, lungs burning from smoke. Finally, as dawn broke, they managed to contain the last of the flames. Exhausted, they surveyed the damage, nearly a quarter-mile of fence destroyed, and several acres of grazing land charred to ash. "Wallace," Cooper said, examining a discarded whiskey bottle near where the fire had started. "Has to be." Tabitha nodded grimly. "This is just the beginning. They're sending a message. Then we'll send one back." Cooper's face was set with determination. "I'm riding to town to talk to Sheriff Turner. This has gone far enough." "I'll come with you," Tabitha said. "Two complaints carry more weight than one." They returned to Cooper's ranch to clean up and change clothes before heading to town. As Tabitha washed the soot from her face and hands, she caught her reflection in Cooper's washroom mirror. Something had changed in her eyes, a spark had returned, that had been absent for too long. Despite the danger and destruction of the night, she felt more alive than she had in years. Sheriff Turner listened gravely to their account of the fire and the ongoing cattle rustling. "The Wallaces have been a thorn in my side for years," he admitted, "but they're careful never leave enough evidence for me to make charges stick." "They're escalating," Cooper argued. "First cattle, now arson. What's next?" "I'll ride out to their place, have a word," Turner promised, "and I'll increase patrols near your properties, but I can't arrest them without proof." As they left the sheriff's office, Cooper's frustration was evident. "That's not good enough. The Wallaces won't stop unless they're forced to." "We'll need to protect ourselves," Tabitha agreed. "Increase our own patrols, set up watches at night." Cooper stopped in the middle of the street, turning to face her. "Tabitha, I don't want you in danger. The Wallaces are unpredictable and violent. If anything happened to you—" "I've been handling threats to my ranch since before you arrived, Cooper Xavier," she interrupted, her chin lifting. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs protection." His expression softened. "I know that. It's one of the things I admire most about you. But this isn't just about capability. It's about—" He hesitated, seemingly searching for words. "About what?" she prompted. "About how I feel when I think of you in harm's way." His voice dropped lower. "About how important you've become to me." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Tabitha felt the walls around her heart tremble, foundations weakening under the sincerity of his gaze. "Cooper, She stopped, uncertain how to proceed. He shook his head gently. "You don't need to say anything. I understand. After what you've lost, opening your heart again must seem impossible." "Not impossible," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "Just terrifying." His eyes brightened at her words. "Tabitha." Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by a commotion further down the street. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, voices raised in anger. Among them, Tabitha recognized Earl Wallace and his brothers. "We should go," she said quietly. "This isn't the time or place." Cooper nodded reluctantly. "We'll continue this conversation later." They mounted their horses and rode out of town, careful to give the Wallace gang a wide berth. The air between them was charged with unspoken words and emotions, too complex to unravel in the aftermath of the night's events. As they reached the fork in the road where their paths would diverge to their respective ranches, Cooper reined in his horse. "I meant what I said, Tabitha. You've become important to me, more important than I expected or planned for." His eyes held hers steadily. "I'm a patient man. I can wait until you're ready to talk about it." Tabitha felt a rush of emotions, fear, hope, gratitude, and something else she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding." That night, alone in her ranch house, Tabitha found herself pacing restlessly. Cooper's words played over and over in her mind. He cared for her, that much was clear, and if she was honest with herself, she cared for him too. The question was whether she could bear to act on those feelings, to risk her heart again. She walked to the mantel and picked up the framed photograph of Jonathan on their wedding day. His kind eyes looked back at her, frozen in time. "What would you say about all this?" she asked the silent image. "About Cooper? About me, possibly." She couldn't finish the sentence, but in her heart, she knew what Jonathan would have said. He had always wanted her happiness above all else. He wouldn't have wanted her to close herself off from life after his death. The realization didn't make her decision easier, but it gave her a measure of peace as she finally retired to bed. The following weeks brought increased tension to the valley. The Wallaces continued their harassment, though more subtly now that Sheriff Turner was watching more closely. Small acts of vandalism, cattle found mysteriously spooked and scattered, tracks of unknown riders circling both ranches at night. Cooper and Tabitha established a system of around-the-clock patrols, their hands working together to protect both properties. They met regularly to coordinate efforts, their personal conversation carefully limited to ranch business despite the undercurrent that ran between them. On a hot August afternoon, Tabitha was alone at her ranch house, completing the monthly accounts, when she heard a horse approach. Expecting one of her hands returning from patrol, she was surprised to see Earl Wallace ride into her yard, alone and unannounced. Tabitha reached for the shotgun she kept by the door before stepping onto the porch. "You're trespassing, Wallace." Earl raised his hands in a mockery of surrender. Now, Mrs. Zimmerman, I come in peace. Just want to have a friendly chat. Say what you came to say, then get off my land. He dismounted slowly, keeping his distance from the porch. I've been thinking about your situation. Must be hard, running this big place all alone. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Seems to me you could use a partner, someone with local connections. Tabitha's grip tightened on her shotgun. I'm managing just fine. For now, maybe, but accidents happen, fences break, cattle stray, fires start. He shrugged. A woman alone faces all kinds of dangers out here. Is that a threat, Earl? A observation. His smile widened. Now, if you were to consider a business arrangement with me and my brothers, say, letting us graze our cattle on your land for a reasonable fee, we could ensure nothing? Unfortunate happens to your property. Tabitha raised the shotgun slightly. Here's my counteroffer. You and your brothers stay off my land and stop harassing my neighbor. Or the unfortunate thing will be what happens when Sheriff Turner finds out about your rustling operation in the North Valley. Earl's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, siding with that outsider Xavier. The only mistake was letting you stay on my property this long. Leave now, Earl. Don't come back. For a tense moment, she thought he might challenge her. Then he spat on the ground, remounted his horse, and turned to go. At the edge of the yard, he called back, You should reconsider, Mrs. Zimmerman. Xavier won't always be around to protect you. Man like that, with no roots here, he'll move on soon enough, leave you high and dry. After he left, Tabitha's hands shook as she lowered the shotgun. She needed to tell Cooper about Earl's visit, but something in the rustler's parting words nagged at her. Would Cooper eventually move on? He had spent years drifting before settling here. What assurance did she have that he wouldn't grow restless again? The thought troubled her more than she wanted to admit. That evening, she rode to Cooper's ranch to inform him of Earl's visit. As she approached, she saw him on the porch, deep in conversation with a well-dressed woman she didn't recognize. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair elegantly arranged, her posture suggesting breeding and education. Tabitha slowed her horse, suddenly uncertain. Cooper hadn't mentioned expecting visitors. As she watched, the woman placed a hand on Cooper's arm, laughing at something he said. The gesture spoke of familiarity, of shared history. For a moment, Tabitha considered turning around and riding home without being seen. The cowardly impulse shamed her. Whatever his relationship with this woman, Cooper deserved to know about Earl's threat. She urged her horse forward, and Cooper looked up at the sound of approaching hooves. His face brightened when he saw her, a genuine smile replacing the polite expression he had worn with the other woman. Tabitha, what a pleasant surprise. He came down the steps to help her dismount. I'd like you to meet an old friend from Boston, Eleanor Phillips. This is my neighbor, Tabitha Zimmerman. Eleanor Phillips extended a gloved hand, her smile cordial, if somewhat assessing. Mrs. Zimmerman, I've heard so much about you. Cooper speaks of you often in his letters. Miss Phillips, Tabitha nodded, taking the offered hand briefly. I hope your journey west was pleasant. As pleasant as such a long journey can be, Eleanor replied with a slight grimace. The accommodations leave much to be desired. I don't know how Cooper has managed to adapt to such rustic conditions. Some find the beauty of the land worth the inconveniences, Tabitha replied, an edge creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. Cooper cleared his throat. Eleanor is visiting for a few weeks. Her father was my mentor in Boston, taught me everything I know about business. How fortunate for you both to reunite, Tabitha said, the words sounding stiff even to her own ears. I apologize for interrupting your visit. I came to discuss a ranch matter, but it can wait until tomorrow. Nonsense, Cooper insisted. Eleanor was just about to retire for the evening after our long ride from town. Please, come inside. Eleanor smiled graciously. Indeed, I'm quite exhausted. It was lovely to meet you, Mrs. Zimmerman. I'm sure we'll have opportunity to become better acquainted during my stay. After Eleanor retired to the guest room, Cooper led Tabitha to his study. I'm sorry for the surprise. Eleanor's visit was unexpected. She wrote that she was coming, but the letter arrived only days before she did. You don't owe me any explanations, Tabitha said quickly. Your personal affairs are your own business. Cooper looked at her curiously. Eleanor is like family to me. Her father took me in after my parents died, gave me a position in his shipping company. She's here because she's concerned about my investment in the ranch. Her father left her his business when he died last year, and she believes I should return to Boston to help her run it. Will you? The question escaped before Tabitha could stop it. Return to Boston? Cooper shook his head. No, my life is here now. His eyes held hers meaningfully. My future is here. The knot of tension in Tabitha's chest eased slightly. I see. Now, what brings you here this evening? You mentioned a ranch matter? Tabitha recounted her confrontation with Earl Wallace, watching Cooper's expression darken as she described the thinly veiled threats. The man's gone too far, Cooper said when she finished. Threatening you directly crosses a line. He's desperate. The increased patrols and Sheriff Turner's attention are cutting into their operations. Tabitha sighed. But he's also dangerous. Desperate men often are. Cooper paced the small study. You should stay here tonight. It's not safe for you to ride back alone after dark, especially after confronting Earl. I can't impose, especially with your guest. It's not an imposition. I have plenty of room, and Eleanor would welcome the female company. His expression softened. Please, Tabitha. It would ease my mind to know you're safe tonight. Something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. All right. Thank you. Cooper's housekeeper prepared a room for her, and Eleanor, despite her earlier claim of exhaustion, joined them for a late supper. The Boston woman was unfailingly polite, her manners impeccable, but Tabitha sensed an underlying current of possessiveness in the way she spoke to Cooper, referencing shared memories and mutual acquaintances. Cooper was quite the eligible bachelor in Boston society, Eleanor remarked over dessert. Mother was constantly fielding inquiries from interested parties hoping for an introduction. I hardly qualify as society, Cooper protested. I was just a businessman with decent prospects. You're too modest, Eleanor insisted. The Xavier name carries weight, even if you choose not to use your family connections. She turned to Tabitha. His grandfather was a founding partner in one of Boston's largest banks. Cooper could have had any position he wanted in the financial world. Tabitha glanced at Cooper, surprised. You never mentioned a banking background. He looked uncomfortable. It never seemed relevant to ranching in Montana. Cooper has always preferred to make his own way, Eleanor explained, her tone suggesting she found this trait admirable, if somewhat perplexing, though many of us hoped he would eventually recognize where his true talents lie. The conversation continued in this vein, with Eleanor subtly emphasizing the disparity between Cooper's cultured Eastern background and his current circumstances. Tabitha found herself growing increasingly quiet, acutely aware of how different her world was from the one Cooper had left behind. After dinner, she excused herself early, claiming fatigue from the day's events. In the guest room, she sat by the window, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. Eleanor Phillips represented everything Tabitha was not refined, educated, connected to Cooper's past. Perhaps Earl Wallace had been right about one thing. A man like Cooper, with his background and options, might indeed move on eventually. The thought left her feeling hollow. Morning brought news that drove personal concerns temporarily from Tabitha's mind. One of Cooper's hands rode in at dawn, with word that a large section of Tabitha's north fence had been cut overnight, and cattle were straying onto Wallace property. It's a trap, Cooper said immediately. They want to claim your cattle wandered onto their land so they can demand compensation, or just keep them. I need to get my men and round up those cattle before the Wallaces can move them, Tabitha said, already heading for the door. I'm coming with you, Cooper stated, his tone brooking no argument. Eleanor, please stay here where it's safe. This could turn dangerous. Eleanor looked distressed. Cooper, surely the sheriff. There's no time, he cut her off gently. Tabitha's cattle are at risk. I'll return as soon as I can. They rode hard for Tabitha's ranch, gathering her hands along the way. By the time they reached the cut fence, the sun was high in the sky, and there was clear evidence that cattle had been driven, not just wandered, deeper into Wallace territory. At least 30 head, from the tracks, said Tom, Tabitha's foreman, examining the ground. Driven northeast, toward the Wallace home ranch? That's deliberate theft, Cooper growled. Not just harassment anymore. Tabitha surveyed the terrain ahead. We need to catch up to them before they reach the Wallace compound. Once the cattle are in their main corrals, getting them back will be much harder." Cooper nodded. "My men and I will ride with you." The combined force of Tabitha's and Cooper's hands followed the cattle tracks across the rolling hills. As they approached a narrow valley that led to the Wallace ranch, they spotted dust rising ahead, the unmistakable sign of a moving herd. "There they are," Cooper pointed. "We can cut them off at the valley entrance." They spurred their horses forward, closing the distance rapidly. As they drew nearer, they could see 3 riders pushing the cattle through the valley, the Wallace brothers. "Hold it right there, Wallace," Tabitha called out as they came within earshot. "Those are my cattle you're driving." The Wallaces wheeled their horses around, clearly surprised by the speed of the pursuit. Earl's hand moved toward his gun, but he thought better of it when he saw the number of riders with Tabitha and Cooper. "These cattle were on our land, Widow Zimmerman," Earl called back, "just collecting what's due for the grazing." "Those cattle were driven through a cut fence," Cooper responded. "That's rustling, Earl, a hanging offense in these parts." A tense standoff ensued, with both sides maintaining their positions at opposite ends of the small herd. Finally, Earl signaled to his brothers. "Take half the herd as payment for damages to our land. The rest can go back with Mrs. Zimmerman." "You'll take none of them," Tabitha stated firmly. "Those are my cattle, on my land until you cut my fence. Return them all, and we'll forget this incident." Earl's face darkened with anger. "You're outnumbered, woman. Even with Xavier's men, you can't take us on our own territory." "Actually, Earl, you're the one who's outnumbered." The new voice came from behind the Wallaces. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Turner and 6 deputies emerging from the trees at the far end of the valley. "Got word of cut fences and missing cattle," Turner said, his expression grim. "Thought I'd ride out to investigate. Interesting to find you boys driving Mrs. Zimmerman's clearly marked herd toward your ranch." Earl's bluster deflated visibly. "Sheriff, these cattle were on our land." "Save it for the judge, Earl." Turner gestured to his deputies. "Arrest all 3 of them. Charges are cattle rustling, vandalism, and trespassing to start." As the deputies moved to take the Wallace brothers into custody, Earl fixed Tabitha and Cooper with a venomous glare. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." "Actually, Earl—" "I think it is," Sheriff Turner replied. "With the evidence I have now, plus complaints from other ranchers you've harassed, you boys are looking at significant prison time." After the Wallaces were led away and arrangements made to return Tabitha's cattle to her ranch, Cooper rode beside her as they headed home. How did the sheriff know to be there? Tabitha wondered aloud. Cooper looked slightly sheepish. "I sent one of my hands to town last night with news of Earl's threats against you. Asked Turner to keep a close eye on the Wallace place. Seems he took the warning seriously." Tabitha glanced at him, touched by his foresight. "Thank you. Without the sheriff's intervention, this could have ended very differently. I couldn't bear the thought of you facing more trouble from them." His expression grew serious. "Tabitha, when I saw your cut fence and realized what could have happened if you'd confronted the Wallaces alone. But I wasn't alone," she reminded him softly. "You were there." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of deepening feelings neither had fully expressed. For the first time since Jonathan's death, Tabitha allowed herself to imagine a future that included someone else. A partnership based not on necessity, but on choice. The moment was broken by the approach of one of Cooper's hands, riding hard from the direction of his ranch. "Mr. Xavier, Miss Phillips sent me to find you. There's a telegram from Boston urgent business," she says. "She's talking about leaving on tomorrow's stage." Cooper frowned. "I need to return to the ranch. Will you be all right getting your cattle settled?" "Of course," Tabitha assured him, though she felt a pang of disappointment. "Go tend to your business." He hesitated, clearly torn. "I'll come by tomorrow, first thing." "There's no rush," she said, more stiffly than she intended. "Your guest should take priority." Cooper looked as if he wanted to say more, but instead, he nodded and turned his horse toward home. Tabitha watched him ride away, wondering if Eleanor's urgent business was the first step in drawing Cooper back to his old life in Boston. That evening, as Tabitha sat alone on her porch, she confronted the feelings she could no longer deny. Somewhere along the way, despite her determination never to risk her heart again, she had begun to care deeply for Cooper Xavier. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She'll never love again, they had said of her in town. For a long time, she had believed them, had made their prediction her armor against further pain. But Cooper had quietly, persistently sat beside her metaphorically and literally until those walls had begun to crumble. The question now was whether she had the courage to act on these feelings, to reach for happiness knowing it could be snatched away again. And even if she found that courage, was she already too late? Was Cooper's path leading him back to Boston, to the cultured society Eleanor Phillips represented? Sleep eluded her that night, her mind circling through possibilities and fears. By dawn, she had made a decision. If Cooper came as promised, she would speak honestly about her feelings. If he didn't, if his priorities lay elsewhere, she would accept it and move forward alone, as she had learned to do. Morning came, bright and clear, but brought no sign of Cooper. Tabitha went about her chores with mechanical efficiency, telling herself she wasn't watching the road from his ranch, wasn't listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. By midday, she had convinced herself he wasn't coming. Eleanor's urgent telegram had likely changed his plans. Perhaps they were already on their way to town to catch the eastbound stage. She was in the barn, aggressively mucking out stalls as if the physical labor could drive away her disappointment, when she heard a horse enter the yard. Steeling herself, she continued her work, unwilling to appear eager or expectant. "Tabitha?" Cooper's voice echoed in the barn, and despite her best intentions, her heart leaped at the sound. She stepped out of the stall, pitchfork still in hand. "I thought you'd be on your way to town by now," she said, struggling to keep her tone neutral. "Your hand said Miss Phillips was planning to leave today. She left this morning." Cooper approached slowly. "I saw her onto the stage myself." Tabitha blinked in surprise. "She's gone? What about the urgent business from Boston?" There was no urgent business. Eleanor invented the telegram as an excuse to leave. His expression was a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "She said there was no point in her staying when it was clear my heart was already spoken for." The pitchfork slipped from Tabitha's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the barn floor. "I don't understand." Cooper took another step toward her. "Don't you?" "Eleanor has had certain expectations about our relationship for years. She came west hoping to persuade me to return to Boston, to accept a position in her company, and eventually, to accept her as more than a friend." "And you don't want those things?" Tabitha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I want," Cooper said, moving closer still, "is right here in Montana. Has been from the moment I laid eyes on a copper-haired widow who informed me the Jameson place would take more than good intentions to make profitable again." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. "Cooper? Let me finish, please." His eyes held hers intently. "I know you've suffered losses that would break most people. I know you built walls around your heart to protect yourself from feeling that pain again. I respect those walls, Tabitha. I've tried to be patient, to give you time and space." He was standing directly before her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "But I can't leave for town tomorrow without telling you how I feel. I love you, Tabitha Zimmerman. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness that you try to hide behind practicality. I love the way you face each day on your own terms, and if you need more time, I'll wait. If you can only offer friendship, I'll accept that. But I had to tell you the truth before another day passed." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, emotions she had suppressed for so long finally breaking free. "They said I'd never love again," she whispered. "After Jonathan died, everyone in town decided my heart was closed forever. For a long time, I believed them, wanted to believe them, because loving means risking loss, and I couldn't bear to lose anyone else." Cooper remained silent, giving her space to continue. "But then you came, with your quiet persistence and your respect for my independence. You didn't try to rescue me or pity me. You just sat beside me in all the ways that mattered." She took a shaky breath. "And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I fell in love with you." The words once spoken seemed to free something within her. A weight she had carried for years lifted from her shoulders. Cooper's face transformed with joy. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you, Tabitha?" She nodded, and he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle, so full of promise, that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Whatever we want," he replied. "We can take this slowly, get to know each other better. Or, she prompted when he hesitated, "or you could marry me." The words rushed out as if he'd been holding them back for too long. "I know it's sudden, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Our ranches adjoin, our values align, and most importantly, I love you and want to build a life with you." Tabitha pulled back slightly to search his face. "Are you sure? Your life in Boston was never where I truly belonged." His expression was earnest. "This land, this life, this is home. Tabitha, if you'll have me." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Tabitha made her decision. The walls around her heart hadn't just crumbled. They had transformed into a bridge leading toward a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you, Cooper Xavier." His smile was brighter than the Montana sun as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. Their laughter echoed through the barn, startling the horses and carrying across the pasture the sound of joy long deferred, finally finding its voice. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Tabitha's ranch. The entire community of White Rock turned out for the occasion, many still marveling at the transformation in the woman they had once pitied. Sheriff Turner stood as Cooper's best man, while Mrs. Peterson from the general store attended Tabitha. As they exchanged vows under the big Montana sky, with the mountains as witnesses, Tabitha felt Jonathan's memory as a blessing rather than a burden. He would have approved of Cooper, she knew, approved of her finding happiness again. The whispers in town changed after that day. "Never thought she'd love again," they said. But that cowboy just sat beside her until she did. And in the years that followed, as Cooper and Tabitha merged their ranches into one of the most successful operations in the territory, as they welcomed 2 children who inherited their mother's copper hair and their father's blue eyes, the story of their love became something of a legend in White Rock. It was a reminder that the heart, no matter how scarred, retains its capacity for healing, and that sometimes the most profound act of love is simply sitting beside someone until they're ready to believe in tomorrow again. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cooper presented Tabitha with a wooden bench for their porch, carved with the words, "I'll sit beside you for all our tomorrows." And as they watched the sunset from that bench, their children playing in the yard, their land stretching out before them, Tabitha laid her head on her husband's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me." Cooper kissed her temple gently. "I would have waited forever." But he hadn't needed to. Love, once given the space to grow, had flourished between them like wildflowers after a spring rain, unstoppable, beautiful, and utterly transformative. The widow who would never love again, and the cowboy who refused to believe it, had written their own ending, one day at a time, side by side.